I followed my wife to the party at her friend's house and watched as she left with another man. My heart pounded in my chest, my breath became short, and my vision became a blur of anger and disbelief. I couldn't believe what I saw. They laughed. They walked together as if they were intimate, as if each movement had already been rehearsed before. She turned to him and, without hesitation, took his hand. The air around me became heavy, as if the world was about to collapse. There were no more doubts. There were no more justifications. This was real. The touch, the look, the way she leaned in to whisper something in his ear. As if I had never existed. My fingers gripped the steering wheel so hard I felt my knuckles turn white. My eyes didn't blink. I couldn't blink. Every detail needed to be engraved in my mind forever. Her dress was the same one I had praised before leaving the house, saying how beautiful it made her look. Now, everything I saw was a symbol of the lie I was living. She looked at that man the same way she used to look at me. But now that wasn't mine. That would never be mine again. They got into his car. A car I had never seen before. The engine roared and I did the same. I started the car and followed them, my mind a storm of thoughts, memories, unanswered questions. Where would they go? Since when did this happen? How many times have I been made a fool of while I believed my wife loved me? How many nights did she come home saying she was tired, that she just wanted to sleep, while in fact she was in the arms of another man? The headlights of the car in front illuminated the winding path to a hotel far from the city. The name glowed in red neon, like a stark warning of what was about to happen. They got out of the car, and my wife, the woman I had shared years of life with, walked inside without hesitation. The man next to her opened the door for her, as if this were a romance, as if they were a couple in love, as if nothing else mattered. As if I didn't exist. As if our story was worthless. I felt my chest exploding. The air seemed thin. Every step she took into that hotel was a stab in my chest. Should I confront her right then and there? Should I go in, scream, end it all at once? Or should I wait? Let her fall into her own trap, collect the evidence, watch her castle of lies crumble around her. Options swirled in my mind, but deep down, I already knew. That woman was no longer mine. In fact, perhaps it never would have been. The night passed slowly, unbearably. I stayed there, in the car, watching, waiting, sinking deeper and deeper into the certainty that I would never touch her in the same way again. That I would never look at her again and see the same woman I loved. The darkness swallowed time and I wondered how many times she had done this before. How many nights like that had I slept peacefully in our house, believing she was just late at work, or with her friends, or any other cheap excuse that now sounded ridiculous. When dawn finally swallowed the last hope left in me, I saw them leave. I saw them laughing again. As if nothing had happened. As if it were something normal. As if the marriage we had never existed. As if the story we built together could be thrown away like trash. As if I were nothing. I couldn't wait any longer. Humiliation burned inside me, turning into something colder, more calculated. I knew exactly what to do. When she arrived home that night, feigning tiredness, I was already there, waiting. Silent. Prepared. Every detail meticulously planned. She would never have imagined. She would never know what awaited her. She entered, took off her shoes and sighed, as if she were a woman exhausted from a normal day. As if she hadn't just spent hours in another man's arms. As if everything was fine. And then, when she saw me there, standing in the room, looking at her like she was seeing a ghost, her body froze. What it was? She asked, forcing a smile, trying to look innocent. I just smiled back. An empty smile. A smile that had nothing to do with joy. Because there, at that moment, I already knew. She hasn't yet. But she was about to find out. And in that moment, she would never have imagined that that would be the last time she would look me in the eye as her husband. Welcome to the channel. Here, betrayal will never be romanticized or justified. The stories you will hear are fictional, but they reflect the harsh reality. Betrayal destroys lives, breaks bonds and leaves deep scars. Our goal is to show the consequences of this act in an impactful and realistic way. Get ready, because today's story is intense, full of twists and turns and will leave you breathless. Take a deep breath, the truth always comes out. Daniel and Laura's marriage has always been seen as an example of stability. In the eyes of their friends, family and even co-workers, they made a perfect couple, one of those who seemed made for each other from the first glance. They met at college, when he was still dreaming of building his career in the technology sector and she was already seeing a promising future as a lawyer. They were young, full of plans, and together they faced the first challenges of adult life, from days of financial difficulties to sleepless nights planning a comfortable future. When they got married, there was no doubt that they were sure of the choice they made. Vows were exchanged with tears in their eyes, and promises of eternal love were made under a starry sky that night, seemed to bless the union. The years passed, and as with any relationship, routine began to shape their marriage in ways they hadn't anticipated. Daniel became a respected name in the technology market, working long hours to maintain the standard of living they so desired. Laura, in turn, managed to establish herself as a lawyer, earning a strong name within the office where she worked. Their professional success was undeniable, but at the same time, it brought something that neither of them immediately noticed: distance. At first, it was just small delays, nights when one of them arrived home too late for dinner, messages answered hours later, accumulated tiredness that made conversations shorter and gestures of affection more spaced out. But these small changes became more frequent, and without them realizing it, that marriage that had once been vibrant, full of desire and complicity, was now based more on inertia than on passion. Daniel tried to compensate for absent moments with symbolic gestures, such as unexpected gifts or last-minute planned trips, but there was always something that meant the plans didn't come to fruition as before. Laura, on the other hand, started to fill the gaps with social engagements, dinners with friends, company events and short work trips. They both still loved each other, or at least that's what they believed, but the connection between them was no longer the same. There were nights when Daniel would wake up in the middle of the night and find himself looking at Laura sleeping next to him, wondering at what moment they had become two more strangers sharing the same space. On other occasions, it was Laura who, upon seeing her husband hunched over the computer screen until the early hours, wondered if that man who once made her laugh effortlessly was still there, somewhere. The house where they lived reflected this silent change. It was big, spacious, decorated with the good taste that Laura always insisted on maintaining, but lately, it seemed colder. Dinners at the table were rare, replaced by hurried meals or snacks in front of the television. Conversations revolved around commitments and agendas, with no room for daydreams about dreams or joint plans. Touch, once natural, now seemed like something to be marked on the calendar. The goodbye kiss at the door was no longer felt, just a formality. Despite this, Daniel still believed that everything was fine, that it was just a phase that would soon pass. He was convinced that professional challenges were taking more time than expected and that things would soon return to normal. When he thought of Laura, he still saw her as the woman he fell in love with, the one who challenged him, who made him laugh, who made every day a new experience. But deep down, there was something inside him that he avoided facing, the fear that the love they defended so much was turning into something different. Something that, perhaps, could not be recovered. Laura, in turn, no longer saw things the same way. Although she loved Daniel, something inside her asked for more. Something she couldn't name, but that made her feel like something was missing. She felt alone, even though she was next to him. She wondered if it was her fault for wanting more than she had, if it was selfish to want something beyond what they built together. The nights I went out with my friends became a refuge, a way to escape the monotony that had set in. The compliments she received from coworkers and acquaintances made her feel alive in a way she no longer felt at home. But, at the same time, she clung to the memory of everything they had experienced, trying to find reasons to continue, to believe that everything could be the same as before. And it was at this point that things began to change imperceptibly. Small details that were previously ignored began to become evident. The way Laura spent more time on her cell phone, messages exchanged with a discreet smile, calls that she answered in another room. The excuses for being a little more late than usual, the chance encounters that seemed more and more frequent. Daniel noticed these changes, but chose to ignore them. He wanted to believe that it was all in his head, that there was no reason to worry. And so, day after day, he clung to the idea that everything was still okay, that their love was strong enough to withstand any bad times. Fate, however, always finds a way to bring the truth to light. And, unbeknownst to him, that dinner between friends that Laura casually mentioned would become the beginning of a discovery that would change everything. Daniel did not suspect that, by following his wife that night, he would not only find answers to all the doubts he had avoided facing for so long, but he would also discover that some truths are irreversible. The night started like so many others. Daniel arrived home after a long day of work and found Laura finishing getting ready. The tight black dress shaped her body perfectly, and the sweet scent filled the space between them as she hurried past him, looking for the last details before leaving. He observed her in the mirror's reflection, noticing the delicacy with which she applied her lipstick, the care in the final touches to her hair. I hadn't seen her like this in a long time. There was a sparkle in her eyes that seemed lost for months. A glow that, he realized, was not for him. She picked up her bag and smiled, casually, as if it were just another ordinary night. She said she would go out with her friends, that it wouldn't be long, and kissed his face with a lightness that made his stomach turn. He responded with a nod, unable to disguise the uneasiness that was growing within him. Instinct whispered something he didn't want to hear. A silent warning that something was out of place. Laura always went out, always had commitments, but that night there was something different. The way she spoke, the way she avoided his gaze, the way her voice sounded rehearsed. Every detail, which might have been ignored on any other day, now seemed like a puzzle about to form before him. The silence in the house was the only thing that remained when she left. Daniel stayed there for a few minutes, still, with his mind spinning in 1,000 directions. He took out his cell phone and opened the conversation with her. He read the last messages they had exchanged. They were short, without emotion, without that warmth that once existed. He scrolled up, looking for something that would prove he was just exaggerating. Nothing. Just empty words, as if they were two roommates sharing a routine. He took a deep breath, trying to push away the thoughts, but an idea took over him before he could resist it. He took the car keys and left. Following Laura seemed like an exaggeration, but at the same time, a necessity. His heart beat faster as he drove through the streets already illuminated by the city lights. He kept a safe distance, watching her car stop in front of a luxurious house, where a party seemed to be taking place. Music, laughter, excited voices. Everything normal, everything as it should be. He almost felt ridiculous for being suspicious. He almost turned around and went home, but then something happened. Something that made his stomach drop. After a few minutes, Laura left the house. But she was not alone. A man accompanied her, tall, well-dressed, with an easy smile. A smile she returned. Time seemed to slow down when she touched his arm, a casual gesture but too intimate to be just a friend. They exchanged a few words and laughed, as if sharing a secret. Then, he lightly pulled her by the waist and they walked together to his car. Daniel's body tensed. His hands were sweaty on the steering wheel, his muscles were stiff. Something inside him broke in that instant. The car started, and Daniel didn't hesitate to follow. The journey was long, and the tension increased with each kilometer covered. The city lights faded away until, finally, they stopped in front of a discreet hotel, far from the crowds. A reserved place, where couples were away from prying eyes. Laura got out of the car, looked around as if checking if she wasn't being seen and headed towards the entrance alongside the man. He touched her back, guiding her safely, as if this wasn't their first meeting. As if that had already happened before. Daniel felt something warm rise in his chest, a mix of anger and despair. His eyes burned, his hands shook. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be true. But there she was, walking in with another man, crossing that door as if he didn't exist, as if everything they had built was worthless. His mind revolved around the memories, the promises exchanged, the years they spent together. He wanted to run to her, scream, demand an explanation, but he knew the truth was already there, before his eyes. And there was nothing she could say that would change what had just happened. The clock ticked slowly. He waited. Time became an unbearable burden as I stared at the hotel entrance, trying to process reality. Every minute that passed was a cruel reminder of what was happening on the other side of those walls. His wife was in there, in the arms of another man, living a moment that should have been theirs. Something broke inside him irreparably. When she finally left, it was already dawn. The same smile was still on her face. The man accompanied her, and before they got into the car, she touched his face with affection, as if thanking him for something precious. Daniel looked away, unable to continue watching. I didn't need to see anything else. I didn't need any more proof. The betrayal was there, raw, real, definitive. But that wasn't the end yet. Not for him. Not for her. And much less for what was to come. Daniel felt his heart beating in his chest like a deafening drum. The cold night seemed to mock the boiling heat that burned on his skin, a mix of fury and pain that grew with every second. The car was parked in the garage, the lights in the house were off, and the absolute silence that hovered around the room contrasted with the storm unfolding inside it. He waited. He waited until the key turned in the lock and the door slowly opened. Laura entered with light steps, as if nothing had happened, as if the night had been just another night, as if she hadn't just destroyed everything they had once built. She barely had time to notice his presence before he moved, emerging from the darkness of the room. The shock on his face was immediate. His eyes widened, his breathing faltered. She didn't expect to find him there, she didn't expect to be greeted by that look. A look that wasn't one of uncontrolled fury, nor overwhelming sadness. It was something worse. An empty look, as if she were nothing more than a specter before him. He said nothing for long seconds. He just watched her, absorbing every detail, every nervous expression, every tiny hesitant gesture. She opened her mouth to speak, but he raised his hand, cutting off any attempt at a lie before it could even form. He didn't want to hear excuses. I didn't want to hear empty explanations that wouldn't change anything. He just wanted her to know that he knew. Laura took a deep breath, trying to find a way to escape the weight of that moment. She tried to smile, tried to act like everything was fine, like her double life wasn't about to implode in front of her. But then, he finally spoke, and his voice was sharp, cold, without any trace of the sweetness he once carried when pronouncing her name. How was the night? The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Laura licked her lips, looking away. Her mind worked in a frenzy, trying to formulate something that wouldn't give her away right away. But there was no way out. He already knew. He had seen it. What are you talking about? His voice was weaker than he intended, betraying the facade of control he was trying to maintain. You know exactly what I'm talking about. He took a step forward, getting close enough that she had no escape. I saw you leave that house. I saw you get into his car. I saw you at the hotel. The air seemed to escape her lungs, and for a moment she lay still, as if her own body refused to react. Daniel had never spoken like that. He had never looked at her like that. This was real. He knew. There was no more pretending. It's not what you think, she finally said, her voice shaking, her eyes searching his face for any trace of understanding. No. He laughed, a bitter, dry laugh, filled with a contempt she never thought she would hear. So tell me, Laura. What exactly am I thinking? Because from what I've seen, it seems pretty obvious. She opened and closed her mouth a few times, but found no words. How could I? There was no justification. There was no way to erase what was already done. You betrayed me, he stated, without needing confirmation. She swallowed hard, feeling her throat burn. An overwhelming pain washed over her, a pain unlike any she had ever felt. It wasn't because of what he did. It was what I was about to lose. Daniel, please, she tried, but he raised his hand again, interrupting her. No. No, please. There's no excuse. You destroyed everything. The pain in his voice was almost tangible, something that made her cringe, that made her hate herself for every wrong decision, for every lie told, for every night she looked at him and pretended nothing was happening. But he wasn't finished yet. There was still more. Much more. He took a deep breath, trying to keep control over the avalanche of feelings that threatened to consume him. But then, something inside him broke. It wasn't just about the betrayal. It was about everything that came before. Everything he had ignored. All the pieces of the puzzle that now made sense. I'm not an idiot, Laura. I'm not naive. Do you think I never noticed? Do you think I never noticed how you walked away? How did your excuses become empty? How did your tapping become automatic? She was silent, feeling the weight of his every word lodge in her chest like an anchor. You didn't just betray me today, he continued, his gaze filled with something deeper than anger. It was disappointment. How long has this been going on? Months? Years? She shuddered, because for the first time that night, she saw the reflection of what she had done. He saw the devastation in their eyes, saw the ruin of the trust that once existed. But then, Daniel did something that caught her completely off guard. He smiled. A smile filled with something she couldn't immediately decipher. Do you know what the most ironic part of all this is? He asked, his voice now calmer, almost cold. I've already made my decision. You don't know it yet, but I've already moved on. Shock spread across her face. Confusion mixed with fear. He wasn't begging for answers. I wasn't in despair. He was calm. What do you mean by that? She asked, feeling a sudden chill down her spine. He ran a hand through his hair, taking a deep breath. The weight of betrayal was still there, but that wasn't what crushed him now. It was something more. Something he finally understood. You betrayed me, Laura, he repeated, now with a tone of acceptance. But, in the end, it was you who lost. She opened her eyes wide, trying to understand what he meant. But then, as if a veil was lifted before her, everything made sense. Daniel was not destroyed. He wasn't trapped in pain. He was free. And that was the greatest revenge of all. Laura felt a shiver run down her spine. Because in that instant, she realized that he was already too far gone for anything she said to bring him back. Laura felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. Those words echoed in his mind like a sharp blow, unexpected, impossible to ignore. She didn't expect that. I expected screams, accusations, tears perhaps. I expected fury, blind rage, lack of control. But no. What he received was something much worse. The calm. The cold certainty that he no longer cared. That he no longer belonged to that pain. That it, somehow, had already become the past. The night seemed even more suffocating inside that silent house. The dim light from the lamp cast shadows on the walls, and everything around seemed still, frozen in that moment where every word spoken altered the course of what would happen next. Laura tried to take a deep breath, tried to regain control, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was slipping out of her hands. "You can't just say that and walk away," her voice broke the silence, carrying a tone that even she herself couldn't quite identify. Despair. Fear. Blame. Even she didn't know for sure. Daniel looked at her for a moment, as if assessing the weight of those words. He tilted his head slightly, as if considering whether it was worth continuing the conversation. But there was something there. Something inside him that demanded to be said. And why not? The question came dry, without any trace of emotion. She took a step forward, her shaking hands trying to find some way to hold on to what was crumbling before her. Because we're still a couple. Because this isn't over yet. He laughed. A low laugh, full of irony. He ran his hands over his face, as if he were tired, as if he was holding much more inside him than he was willing to let on. "Do you really believe that, Laura?" he asked, finally looking at her. A look that made her feel a chill run down her spine. "After what you did? After what I saw?" She opened her mouth to respond, but found nothing. Because any argument would sound ridiculous. Any justification would be empty. So, she did what was left. "I was wrong," the words came out as a whisper, as if she was admitting it to herself for the first time. I don't know why I did that. I don't know what led me to." "You know exactly why you did that," he cut her off, without allowing her to hide behind excuses. "You chose." He chose every time he lied. Every time she went out saying she was going to meet her friends. Every time I picked up the phone and deleted the messages. She felt a lump form in her throat, but she couldn't cry. Because crying would mean assuming that everything was irreversible. "I still love you, Daniel," her voice broke at the end of the sentence, but it was sincere. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if absorbing those words. When he opened them, there was a deep sadness there. Not anger. "I don't despise. Just sadness." "Maybe you will," he said finally. "But not in the way that matters." She felt her chest tighten, as if the air around her had become denser. "So that's it? Will you just go away? Are you going to throw it all away?" His voice now carried a different weight. A tone of challenge, of disbelief. Daniel took a deep breath. He looked around that house, that room, those furniture that once seemed full of happy memories. Now they were just empty memories. Symbols of something that no longer existed. "You broke everything before I even had a chance to hold the pieces," his voice was firm, without hesitation. "I spent months, years, trying to understand what was wrong. Trying to save what I thought still existed. But the truth is, I was fighting alone." Laura tried to hold his hand, but he backed away. Her touch no longer had the same meaning. "Please let me fix this." He stared at her for long seconds, as if analyzing the depth of that request. As if he was searching within himself for any part that still wanted to believe. But there was nothing else. "There's nothing left to fix." The words were definitive. Like a final blow. Laura felt the impact in her chest, as if something inside her was breaking. She never imagined she would lose Daniel. She never imagined he would let her go like this, without one last effort to hold her. But there he was, in front of her, and there was no longer any doubt. He was already gone. She watched as he grabbed his car keys, as he walked to the door without looking back. The sound of the lock unlocking echoed through the room, and then, he left. And in that moment, Laura realized what it really meant to lose someone. It wasn't seeing him leave. It was knowing that no matter what he did, he would never come back. The door closed with a soft click, but to Laura, the sound was deafening. She stood there, standing in the middle of the room, feeling the weight of silence crush her, as if the entire house was collapsing around her. His eyes were fixed on the doorknob, as if he expected that, at any moment, Daniel would change his mind and come back. But he didn't come back. The sound of the engine starting outside and the headlights of the car moving away down the street were cruel confirmation that he was indeed gone. The room, once a space of comfort and safety, now seemed like a strange, suffocating place. Every piece of furniture, every picture on the wall, every detail around her seemed to mock the story they had built together. His absence was an open wound, a void that expanded in an overwhelming way. She moved slowly, feeling the cold ground beneath her feet, as if she were stepping on invisible shards. He sat on the sofa, hugging his knees, trying to contain the tremor that took over his body. The weight of reality finally crashed down on her. He was gone. There were no more discussions, no more arguments, no more promises of change. There were no more chances. His breathing was uneven, his thoughts were confused, and then something unexpected happened. Desperation turned to anger. Not against Daniel. Against herself. Every lie, every excuse, every moment of hesitation came flooding back to her like a flood of memories she couldn't control. How could she be so blind? How did you allow everything to get to that point? His chest hurt, but it wasn't a physical pain. It was something deeper, more devastating. She picked up her cell phone with shaking hands, unlocking the screen with difficulty. Her eyes scanned the messages, the call logs, every trace of the double life she had led up until that moment. And then, with a sudden movement, he erased everything. Every conversation, every photo, every evidence of your bad choices. But the act did not bring relief. The past could not be erased so easily. His gaze fell on a picture frame on the coffee table. It was a photo from her wedding, the day she believed Daniel would be hers forever. He was laughing, holding her hand tightly as she threw her head back in one of those spontaneous moments of genuine happiness. A memory of a time where she would never have imagined doing something that would put that love at risk. She stood up, unable to continue standing there. The space that was once home now felt suffocating, as if the walls were closing in around him. He grabbed a coat and left, with no defined destination, just the need to escape his own thoughts. The night was cold, and the biting wind made his skin crawl, but nothing was worse than the internal cold he felt. He walked aimlessly through the empty streets, each step heavy, each breath difficult. His mind revolved around a single thought: what would he do now? How would I move forward knowing I had lost Daniel forever? He had been her safe haven, her greatest certainty, and now, there was nothing left but regret. Deep down, she knew she couldn't blame him. I knew that if the roles were reversed, she would have left too. The problem was accepting this. She stopped in front of a cafe they used to frequent, the glass reflecting her own pale face, her eyes marked by exhaustion and pain. She stood there, staring at her own image, realizing how different she was from the woman she once was. The sparkle in his eyes was gone. And it wasn't because of the betrayal itself. It was because of what she had become. Her cell phone vibrated in her pocket, a sound that made her start. She hesitantly picked it up, her heart racing, but her chest collapsed when she saw the name on the screen. It wasn't Daniel. It was the other one. The mere sight of that name caused an immediate revolt within her. He felt his stomach turn, and without thinking twice, he refused the call. A second later, a message appeared on the screen. "How are you?" The absurdity of that question hit her hard. How was she? How could he even ask something like that? He didn't understand. He would never understand. The truth is that he was never important. It was never about him. And in that moment, Laura realized how insignificant he was in the story he had just destroyed. Without hesitation, he deleted the message and blocked the number. It didn't matter anymore. She continued walking, each step seeming more difficult than the last. The weight of reality was crushing. She knew there was no going back. I knew that anything I said or did wouldn't change how Daniel felt. And maybe, deep down, she didn't deserve to change. When he finally returned home, the silence was even worse than before. She climbed the stairs slowly, as if each step reminded her of what she had lost. He stopped at the bedroom door, feeling a lump in his throat when he saw the empty space. The closet was open, and some drawers were turned over. Daniel had taken some things, but not everything. And that hurt even more. Because it meant he would only come back for the rest. She lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the tears finally escape. There were no more masks, there were no more justifications. She was alone. And perhaps, for the first time, I understood the real meaning of that word. The sound of the key turning in the lock echoed through the empty house. Laura was startled, quickly sitting up in bed. Her heart raced, her breathing became ragged, and her eyes fixed on the bedroom door as if she were about to witness something she wasn't ready to face. Time seemed to drag by, each second heavier than the last, until finally he entered. Daniel was there, standing on the threshold of the door, his expression closed, his eyes empty, carrying a suitcase in one hand and a bag with some clothes in the other. The simple fact of seeing him there, so real, so present, but at the same time so distant, made something inside her twist painfully. He no longer looked like the man who had once looked at her with love. That look she knew so well was now just a shadow of what it once was. She stood up slowly, hesitantly, as if any sudden movement could make him disappear for good. I wanted to speak, I wanted to say so many things, but no words seemed adequate. Daniel just sighed, placing the suitcase next to the bed and starting to collect the rest of his things without even looking at it. You could have warned me you were coming, her voice finally broke the silence, but it sounded weak, almost pleading. He continued folding a shirt, putting it in his suitcase without rushing, as if he were in another reality, as if that conversation no longer mattered. I didn't think it was necessary, the answer came dryly, without any emotion, as if each word was an unnecessary effort. Laura felt a lump form in her throat, the growing pain inside her becoming almost unbearable. Are you really leaving like that? Without even talking to me? Daniel finally stopped what he was doing and looked up at her. His face was a mask of emotional exhaustion, as if there was nothing more to be said. What do you want me to say, Laura? His voice was low, but cutting. That I forgive you. That we can try again. That all this can be erased as if it never happened. She opened her mouth to respond, but he shook his head before any sound came out. It can't be fixed, he continued, crossing his arms, finally giving her his full attention. Don't you understand? You broke something that you can't redo. It's not just about betrayal. It's not just about that night. It's about everything that came before that. She felt her chest tighten, guilt seeping into every cell in her body. I know I made a mistake, his voice was full of pain. I know I destroyed everything. But I need you to know it wasn't about you. It was never about you. Daniel laughed. Not a laugh of humor, but of incredulity. He ran his hands over his face, rubbing his tired eyes. Of course. There's always a justification, right? There is always a reason that makes everything seem less worse. But do you want to know? I don't care why. I don't care what you were feeling, what was missing in your life. You had so many opportunities to tell me what was wrong, to look me in the eyes and tell me what you needed. But you chose something else. You chose to betray me. He chose to live this lie. She swallowed hard, the weight of his words crashing down on her like an avalanche. I wanted to protect you from the truth, he confessed, feeling his own voice wavering. Did you want to protect me? He interrupted her, taking a step forward. Laura, you wanted to protect yourself. You wanted to keep having everything. I wanted a marriage to show off to others, a loyal husband, a comfortable life. But I also wanted more. So he took everything he could without thinking about the consequences. She looked down, feeling tears burning her vision. I loved you, he said, almost in a whisper. No, Laura, he denied, his voice firm. You loved the idea of what we were. But real love doesn't do that. Silence stretched between them, filled with everything that would never be said again. She watched him finish putting away the last of his things, each movement a reminder that from that moment on, there would be no more us. When he closed the suitcase and lifted it, something inside it completely broke. "Daniel, wait," her voice was shaky, a desperate plea, but he didn't stop. He walked to the door without looking back. She stepped forward, held his hand, one last effort, one last plea. He stood still for a second, but then slowly pulled his hand back. "Take care of yourself, Laura," was all he said before leaving. And then, the door closed. This time, forever. Time passed like a sharp blade, cutting the days and transforming the open wounds into scars that, no matter how much they closed, always left their mark. Daniel moved on. He not only walked away from Laura, but he also rebuilt his life in a way he once didn't even imagine was possible. The first months were the most difficult. He still woke up in the middle of the night, hoping to hear the familiar sound of her breathing next to him. He felt the urge to pick up the phone and send a message out of pure habit, but every time his mind betrayed him with those memories, he forced himself to remember the last conversation they had, the cold touch of her trying to hold him, the way he felt his soul release as he pulled his hand back. And that's how, little by little, he rebuilt himself. He left the house behind, moved to a new apartment, started over. Work was his anchor for the first few months, but eventually he realized he didn't want to just hide in routine. He wanted to live. So he started going out, meeting new people, not because he wanted to forget Laura, but because, for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to be happy without carrying a weight on his shoulders. And it was on this path that he met someone who didn't bring with him lies, secrets or shadows from the past. Someone who looked him in the eye and saw only him, and not the guilt of something that no longer existed. Over time, this person became more than a distraction, they became a new chapter. And for the first time, he understood that true love was not just holding on to what was once good, but allowing himself to find something even better. Laura, on the other hand, experienced a different kind of fresh start. A fresh start fraught with consequences. Daniel's absence was not something she was able to fill. The emptiness that was left when he was gone was not just from his presence, but from the very life she destroyed with her own hands. In the first few days, she tried to deny the weight of loneliness, went out, tried to occupy her mind with anything that would make her forget, but nothing seemed to work. The lover, the one who once seemed like an exciting escape, meant absolutely nothing now. In fact, he never meant it. She realized too quickly that what happened between them was not love, not even true passion. It was just a symptom of something broken within herself. A symptom of a dissatisfaction that she never knew how to name and that now consumed her completely. She tried to look for him once or twice, as if that would ease the pain she felt, but he wasn't willing to deal with the ruins of something that was never meant to be eternal. And that only made her realize how right Daniel was. She had made her choices and now she was alone to deal with them. Weeks turned into months, and the house that was once shared became just an empty, cold, soulless space. She started avoiding the places they used to go together, but the cruel irony of life is that sometimes fate doesn't care what you want to avoid. And that's how, one day, as he was crossing the street, his eyes met Daniel's. He was there, on the other side, walking calmly, accompanied by another woman. There was a gleam in his eyes that she recognized, but that was no longer for her. He felt light, complete, as if everything that happened between them was just a distant echo. She felt a chill run down her spine, not out of jealousy, but because, in that moment, she had the final confirmation of what she already knew. Daniel moved on. And she would never be part of this new life again. When he saw her, there was no hesitation, there was no drama. Just a polite nod, a simple gesture that carried everything that needed to be said. And then, he continued walking, without looking back. Laura stood there, still, feeling the weight of everything she lost. For the first time, he understood the true price of his choices. It wasn't the betrayal itself that destroyed her. It was the way she threw away someone who was always willing to fight for her. Now, she was just a closed chapter in his story. And the worst of all, she knew she would never have another chance to rewrite it. Now I want to know what you thought of this story. What was your favorite part? Do you think Daniel made the right decision? Leave your opinion in the comments, I really want to know what you think. And if you liked this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Here, betrayal will never be romanticized, because the truth is one, it destroys lives. Until next time.